Hello, my name is Xander. Welcome back to a Docker and Django tutorial. In this tutorial, we are going to Dockerize a Django application as a complete beginner to Docker. So I will assume you have Docker and Python installed and you're ready to get started. By all means, if you would like to, please use the video timeline in the video description to skip ahead. But let's first try and give you some underpinning knowledge to help you understand the process we are about to undertake. There are 4 steps in this tutorial, or Dockerizing a Django application. So first of all, you may already be familiar with this step. We're going to create a new Django application. Nothing special here, just a basic application. Literally just start Django and maybe make a new app. Then we'll move ahead and prepare a Django app for Docker. So once we prepared the Django app for Docker, we can then go ahead and actually build a Docker image. And at this point, we can then use that image to start a Docker container, and the Docker container will then run that image. And then essentially what we have at the end of this process is Django running in a Docker container. So just building on that idea slightly, here we're going to be building a Django application. So once the application is finished, we then need to build what is known as a Dockerfile. So this is just a text document that's going to contain all the commands and all the information that Docker needs to know about how to run Django successfully in a container, for example. So once we've got that information, we can then build the image. So think of an image as, for example, a Windows CD, and you want to install Windows on your computer. So here what we want to do is we want to run Django on a computer, but in this case we're going to run it in a container. So if you wanted to run Windows on your computer or to install Windows, you would take the CD or USB drive, put it into your computer, and on that CD drive or USB drive, everything that is needed to run Windows is on that resource. It will then get installed, and then you obviously have Windows installed. So think of an image, a Docker image like that. Here, our Docker image is going to have Django and all the other applications and dependencies or packages that we're going to need to run Django. Now, that will also include an operating system, a very lightweight operating system. Typically, it's going to be a Linux-based operating system. So we take that image with everything on it that we're going to need to run Django, and then we start a container and then use that image to build our container or the contents of the container, say. So what we now have in our container is an independent operating system. On that, we might have a database installed, obviously our Django application and files, and then any package that Django needs to get running. So essentially what our container is a computer system. But of course, this container can run within our own computer. So one of the main benefits here of utilizing Docker, for example, is we can build these images. Now remember, these images will have all the instructions on how Django will run. Now the benefit of this, for example, is I can build an image and I can give it to you and you can run it on your computer in a container. And that will work exactly the same way because it will have exactly the same setup in your container as my container. And that can be really kind of beneficial for a number of reasons. For example, testing the application or just sharing and developing your application with your other team members. So it creates a consistent environment in order to build the application. So another benefit we could identify here is that this image that we build, it can be easily installed on a server, for example, AWS, Azure, DigitalOcean, or Heroku, for example. So we know that when we install it on any of these services, our image has all the instructions again, and services and packages, etc., and setup configuration that's needed to run our application. So we can build a consistent environment from the local machine all the way over to the server. So essentially what we can do is we can configure and set up Django within our container in our local machine, and then we know that when we deploy it on any of these services, it's going to work exactly the same. Or at least that's the general idea. So we will need an application to get started. So I'm going to quickly blast through this and build an application. So let's start off by building a virtual environment. Then go ahead and activate the environment. So now it should say venv. Then go ahead and install Django. So now let's make a Django application or Django project. So there is a dot at the end here. So core space dot. So I do just want to make a lightweight package here. So I'm not going to create a new app. I'm going to build a new file inside of my core folder called views. Now head into the URLs file and just add 2 lines here. So we're going to import views and then we're going to create a new path which is going to represent our home page, and then we connect that to a view called home. So now head into the view file. We're going to need a few things here. So first of all, let's bring in the render so we can render. We'll move that in a second. So we're going to create a new function called home, take in the request, and then we're going to return using render. So we're going to put together the template. So we're just basically going to return this template index. Let's get rid of that comma. So that's the view, and now let's create a new folder here in core called templates, and then we're going to need to create this new file called index, and then here we're just going to say hello there, or hello Docker. So we save that, and then we're also going to need to go into settings, just register core, so we can use this template here inside of this core package. So here in the settings, we're just going to add core into that's the installed apps. So let's go ahead and py-manage-py run the server. So that should start. And now we can navigate to the browser and check to see if it's working. And there we go. So head over to 127.0.0.1, the loopback address, port 8000. That should now run or serve your Django application. Here it says hello Docker. So now what we want to do is to run our Django application within a Docker container. So head back into the terminal here. I'm going to press Ctrl and C to close the server. Now I'm going to need to provide Docker some instructions. One thing it's going to need to know is what packages to install when we do actually place it in the container. So let's go ahead and type in py, or even better, pip, and then freeze, and then the right chevron, and then let's call this requirements.txt. So here's the requirements text. So pip is now going to look to see what applications are installed in order to get our Django application working and place it within a file called requirements.txt. So this file can now be utilized for Docker. It now knows what packages to install in order to get this Django application working. Now obviously this will scale as your application grows, and there might be other dependencies that you want to install, for example your database. So here we're just going to be setting this application up, and later tutorials we'll look at how to actually utilize or integrate a database in this process. So now we need to build a Docker file. So remember before I said this is a text document that basically contains all the commands and instructions for us to build an image. So all we need to do here is create a new file. Let's just call this Dockerfile. So there's no file extension here, just Dockerfile. Press enter. The container that we build will be running an operating system, and we can select what operating system we want to run in our container. So if you head over to Docker Hub, here you will see lots of different images of operating systems that we can set up within our image so that we can run Django. Now, what I recommend at this point is just to use a lightweight version of Linux, so it won't be very large, so your image size will be very small. So now we're going to go ahead and actually build our Docker file. So let's remember this is a text document that's going to contain the commands, instructions that are going to be needed to assemble our image. So what's happening here is that when we build an image, Docker's going to run through each of these commands and execute the commands. The result of this execution is going to be an image prepared and ready to be run on a Docker container. So let's start by choosing an operating system. So here we're going to be running Python. So here I've selected the Python 3.8 Slim Buster, which is a lightweight Linux operating system with Python installed. Just head over to the Docker Hub and have a look if you're interested to learn more about that. So now we've got the operating system. So it's just going through the process as if we were going to install Django. So first of all, we're going to need a folder to put our application in. So here we're going to have a folder called app. So that's our working directory. And now we're inside our working directory. We are now going to copy across our requirements text from our directory here over to the image, a new folder here. Now this folder is on the operating system. So we've created and moved into this app folder, and we're going to copy across the requirements text here over to the working app, and we're going to call that requirements text. So that copies over the requirements text. And now what we can do, as you might imagine, is run that requirements text. So remember here, our requirements text has all the packages that we're going to need to get Django working, in this case in our container. So we go ahead and run that command, pip3 install -r requirements.txt to run and to install all of those packages. Now what we need to do is just copy across all of the other folders here, because this comprises of everything that we need to get our Django application working. So we say dot. So we're going to be running commands here within inside of this folder. So because we run the command to create the image inside of this folder, dot here is referring to this folder. Now where do we want to copy this folder to? To dot. To remember, we're now inside of this app folder, our working directory, where we've just installed the requirements and it placed our requirements text file. So now we're simply going to copy across everything here over to this folder. Right, so now that's in place. Now we're going to run the final command. So just like you would do here when we create a Django application, to run the Django application, we're going to need to execute a command in the terminal. So cmd, a command line terminal, what we're going to do here is run Python 3. So that's our start of our command, and then the manage py command, and then run server. So the next thing is a little bit tricky to understand, but what we want to do here is we want to make our application accessible from outside, externally from the container. Now the container we build is a container, a separate container that we obviously have installed or is running on our operating system, but it is exactly that. It's a container which we can't get into unless we command prompt into it, for example. It's an operating system running within the container. So what we want to do is we want to make our application available within our main computer. So we set up a network address of 0000. Now that's just going to essentially make our application available externally or externally visible from outside of the container. And here you can see we're going to run the port as per normal :8000. So that's going to allow Django to run on the normal port of 8000. Now what you don't want happening here, when we copy across our folder here, we don't want to copy across the venv folder, the virtual environment. So what I've done is I've created this new file. Now we are in Windows, so what we need to do here is create a .dockerignore file. So .dockerignore and then dot at the end. So in Windows, that's typically how we're going to set this up, this file. So if we use .dockerignore, I don't think the file will be created successfully. So .dockerignore .file, and then go inside of there, and I've just excluded the venv folder here. So that's not going to be copied across in our Docker file. So we're just making sure of that. Of course, at this point, you could add any other file in here to ignore, to allow to make sure Docker ignores any of those files when we copy across from this folder. So that is all the configuration that we're going to need here. So now what we can do with this configuration is now run and create an image. So if you have Docker Desktop installed, you can see by default there's no images and no containers. So what we're going to do now is create the image. The image will then appear here in the image area, and then we're going to run the container from that image. So our container will appear here. So let's go ahead in the command prompt. Now it's important here to remember that you need to be in the correct directory, so the folder, the project folder directory to run this command. I have placed the two commands that we're going to run here in the command text file here. So the first command here is going to be docker build, and then we're going to provide a tag. Essentially what we're going to do is we're going to name this image utilizing this tag flag here. So we're going to call this Python Django, and then dot is referring essentially to this folder here. So we're going to build whatever is inside of this folder here. So let's go ahead and run this command. It should take a couple of seconds because what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to download the Buster image, the Python image. So that might take a couple of seconds to do that, but eventually it will finish. Now, if you go back at this point into your Docker desktop, you can see that we now have the new image appearing here in our image area. So that was called, we tagged this Python Django. That just makes it easier for us to identify and run this. So you can see it's 194 meg in size. So that's obviously including the operating system file and your Django application. So now what we want to do is to create a container. So here we're going to use docker run and then publish. So what's going to happen here, the publish flag here is going to allow us to select and to map across the port from our container to our computer. So we're saying here that in our Dockerfile, if you remember here, we're going to set up and run Django on the port 8000 port. Now, what you can see here in the command text is that we're going to look for that port and then map it across to our main computer's 8000 port. So when we open up our browser and type in 127.0.0.8000, that port is going to be mapped across to our container and therefore show our Django application. So let's go ahead and run this command now. So when we do that, we should now see, if we go back to our Docker desktop here, we can now see that our container has been created and it's currently running and there's no problem. So we can now head over to our browser. So if we load up the 127.0.0.1.8000 again, you can now see it's running our application. So we're now running Docker inside, now running Django. I was too excited there. We're now running Django inside of our Docker container. So hopefully it's a little bit clearer now how to get started with Docker and what's happening here. Now, the wonderful thing about this, the Docker desktop here, we can go into the containers, we can stop and start the container if we want to. On the right hand side here, there's some icons. Sorry, I can't zoom out anymore. But on the right hand side, you'll see if you hover over your container, you can start, stop and delete the container. And a similar thing here with the image on the right hand side. You can't see it here on the screen. You can use the dots and to remove the image, etc. So there's a lot of manageability here, or there's a lot of administration you can do, from the Docker desktop application. So like we established earlier, now we have this image. This image is being pre-created. I've set up the environment, or I've defined the environment variables, and I can now give this to you. And you can run this from your Docker desktop, or you can run that from Docker installed on your computer. So like I said previously, the benefit of this is if I'm developing an application and I want you to test this application, this guarantees that the environment that I'm working in is the same environment as you are. So one of the common problems might be, for example, if I'm creating a program, an application, and I'm running Windows, and then I give it to you to test, and then you try it on Linux, for example, there could be different problems occurring because you're using a different operating system, a different environment to run the application. So similar to that, I now have a container or an image which I can run on a server, and I can guarantee that because I've already set up my image with the configuration, the operating system and all the configurations, it's going to run in a similar way on the server. So there's some consistency there I'm creating by utilizing Docker. So I do hope that was useful. This is at the start of the journey, or your journey into Docker. Of course, there's lots more things from this point to learn, and I will follow this tutorial up with many more tutorials helping and supporting your progress and understanding of Dockerizing applications in or with Python. Thank you very much for listening. Please like and subscribe to the channel, and hopefully I'll see you in the next tutorial.